episode of Moving Forward No Breaks. I'm your host, Jamal Boyce, or should I say Jamal Feeds Them All, however I'm going to name myself on this podcast. Uh, so I'm back at it again. I know it's been a few weeks since I last posted my first podcast, and it wasn't much of a podcast. It was me talking a few minutes, introducing basically a speech or presenting a speech that I gave in front of some of my counterparts in the educational IT space. And I got a lot of reviews and stuff, and so I just felt it's because it impacted a lot of people. I got a lot of positive response. I felt that should be probably the first one I should kick off. This actual podcast, which I'm just trying to get on board. I'm trying to do stuff, and I'm like, I had plenty of opportunities to record some podcasts during the break since this is the 3rd of January, so I took off about a week just to rejuvenate, refresh. Plus, it was really slow at work because basically 80% of the staff weren't there, and I'm in the IT space where, yeah, we could do stuff, during the downtime, but it was nobody there, and I thought it was beneficial. I had plenty of hours. Let me just take some time off and spend with my kids. Like I said, I'm trying to move forward, no breaks. That also means moving forward with relationships. Enjoying the time and the time that I have available to spend with my kids. So we did some things. We went a lot. We went to the movies, saw Sing 2, which was pretty good. Saw Spider-Man, was it Welcome Home or one of the No Way Home or No Way Out? That was pretty good. My son, he gets a little antsy watching movies. He gets a little tired, and then if it's kind of scary, he doesn't like it so much. But then we went to the snow, went to the mountains, I should say, where there was snow, and that was actually enjoyable. Just getting my kids out the house, enjoying nature. It's very beautiful in California right now, especially after the rain. So we got clear skies. We got beautiful, like just scenic areas. Like looking at the mountain, you see the mountain tops, the mountain caps. Got snow on top of them, and it looks very beautiful right now. We had several days of rain, so it was hard to get out. We were mainly indoors, and so that's another reason I didn't want to go to work. People drive crazy, and then during the rain, you just want to be on the couch and chill. So I just did a lot of that during the past week and a half. But I was just thinking to myself, I did have plenty of opportunities to record, and I get on my kids because they watch shows like Ryan or other kids, or they're just playing video games or playing with toys. I'm like, you guys can do that very same thing. Why are you watching somebody else do it? And then I had to think about myself. I'm like, I'm the same way. I listen to people. I'm constantly on YouTube looking at podcasts or videos. And I'm like, I can be creative just as well. I can put out content just as well. So why am I sitting back? Because I'm talking about moving forward, and I'm already reverting back to that couch potato life. So I'm gonna try to be more consistent, or I'm gonna try to find my niche, or what's the reasonable time frame for me to be putting out content, and what's the best available time for me to do that as well. So as you see videos or podcasts come up, they might be stagnant or erratic at first, but hopefully I'll find my place in the space. So based off of so the whole podcast is about moving forward. No excuses, no breaks. And if you've been paying attention to the news, you're just hearing people just have mixed reviews of what's going on, whether it's with the pandemic and the vaccines and the mandates, and seeing the efficacy of the vaccine with the latest virus, the Omicron. And just even the responses that you get from the CDC and some of the things that have been said by many people in the past about eventually it's going to hit us all, and just about the news just pushing out fear, fear, fear. some people who constantly consume that's that's their form of information without getting out the box, without just going outside, without listening to other perspectives, other views, and it's detrimental. And as you heard in my speech, I just said like life is not. We as human beings were not built to be basically just isolated indoors, away from nature, away from others. Like we are social beings. We are meant to connect. And even as an introvert, the self proclaimed introvert, um, I even seen that this is not good. This is not good for me. This is not good for others. I feel I have something in me that may be beneficial for others, and I feel other people out there have contacts, social communication skills. There's something that's beneficial that it's innate in us, whether it's a simple touch, a hug, a hello, a smile, like, and it's not on a computer screen, it's not on a tablet. Like we need to engage, and you get motivated, you get joy, you get inspired just by simply connecting. Um, and one of the things that happened to me last year, basically almost a year ago, both my uncles passed. One passed from cancer, and one passed from COVID. And the one that passed from COVID, I just recall we were trying to have like a family, like a virtual, just not meeting, but just virtual, just interaction. We're all gathered together, all connected from various states, various locations, since we couldn't physically connect. And I just recall my uncle being unable to hop on the uh, Zoom call because he couldn't figure out how to connect on his phone, and I was trying to walk him through it, and he was saying no nurses were available, and it just seemed like he was just straining. I didn't want to put too much on him because he was just in a I could hear from his voice he's very weak. He was one that was always connected, whether Facebook or any other kind of connection, just to get mainly Facebook. He would constantly put up pictures of the family, whether it's my family, extended family, my grandpa, like just of the burial sites, my grandma. Like he was all about just connection, and that's even some of the statements we stated during his memorial service. Just his ability and his drive just to keep the family connected. And so this recollection of just him not being able to connect, it's very sad to have that as the basically one of the final memories that I have of him, because we all don't know at what state he passed. If he found out his younger brother passed of cancer and he's checking social media and he passed from that, or we don't know. Um, but if you guys all have had some experience being in a hospital for a friend or a loved one, and some in various states, like you just know the state of being in a hospital. It really doesn't bring forth life. It's cold, and if you're alone, it's like it's a dreaded place to be in. And one of the benefits in the past, prior to the pandemic, family members would always have the ability to come into the room, hug on, sit with their family members or loved ones, pray for them, touch them, because I just feel that brings forth life. It brings forth joy. It just brings forth hope. I can just recall, and just my folks, once they saw my daughter first, she was the firstborn, just seeing how that it just brought like new life. It just re-energized them, and like they constantly wanted to see the grandbabies. My in-laws, they constantly want to see the grandbabies. When they go to the mall, they're looking for stuff to buy for their grandbabies, because they bring forth joy in life. And I felt the same way just about my uncle. I'm like, if he just had somebody just to give him hope, to give them joy, to give him just some sense of like purpose, where would he have been? Would that extended his time on this earth? Would that have been a place where he just had joy? But not having that, I just felt like a lot of these policies, guidelines, they're talking about preserving life, but what kind of life is it when you're putting yourself in a bubble? When you're taking no risks? When you're not allowing loved ones to connect, even for a brief moment? All in the guise of safety and health. Because I just feel like a lot of these things were not well thought of, and it just it impacted many people. Many people lost loved ones, weren't able to connect with them in their last days, weren't able to have proper memorial services where others could come and say their last goodbyes, and it's unfortunate. And I think we're going to reflect on a lot of these decisions and see they weren't beneficial. Now you're seeing statements now about seeing that there needs to be a balance in our guidelines, where you have the spokesperson doctor of the time now stating the impacts of like now we need to shorten the isolated period for individuals because they cannot function or be isolated by themselves for 10 days plus, and seeing the effects of that on adults, on children. And I know most of it is driven by businesses. A lot of the decision making throughout history is based off money, and what's driving a lot of the decisions. A lot of you have to look at the root, and it has to be money. But back to the point, it's like they're seeing like kids kids were more impacted when they were in virtual school. Suicides went up, depression went up, people went to their vices, because some people I guess don't know, like sometimes most of the, depending on the area you are, the school was probably the safest place for kids, because their home life may have been a lot of struggle, a lot of issues that were not safe for their well-being, and their only sense of like semblance of just like normality was in a school setting. But we kept pushing these very restrictive policies, and to our own detriment. And so with this new year, I just pray. I pray for our leaders. I pray for our decision makers. I pray for those in the space of teachers, because now you're hearing that teachers want to go back to the virtual in certain areas. And I think a lot of the things are either selfish or either done because they consume fear. When you like turn on this trigger, it's like hard to like stop the faucet. Now you can't like go backwards now once you've kind of initiated a process. And a lot of people's hopes and beliefs are in certain processes. I don't know how I got to this point, but as I was talking about my show, it's about moving forward, no breaks. Um, and when you move forward, when you do a podcast, when you do a speech, when you go for a job, when you try to connect with a person you're interested, um, you always have to consider, like, I'm doing this in the midst of risk. There is potential risk with making this decision. It may not go according to plan. Um, and even in Fauci's statement as far as the 10-day policies, like, there's going to be some risk in cutting it in half. Like, we all understood risks. Uh, During the pandemic, or we're still in the pandemic, but while school was out, I would read statements about from parents or family members or just people in general, like, we can't return back to school, or we can't return to work until the coronavirus is completely eradicated. That's not realistic. It's so many things out there that we could die from. There's other illnesses, whether it's cancer, whether it's some surfing with immune deficient diseases, whether it's flying on a plane or driving a car. Like, there's risk to life. We live in an imperfect world, but God still gave us this world to enjoy. And He said, and He also stated that there were going to be days of mourning, there were going to be days of rain, there were going to be days of despair, along with the days of joy, days of prosperity, days of just fulfillment. Like, you're going to get the benefits, and also you're going to feel the pains, but that's life. And if you can't go through life understanding the risk, like, I just took my kids to the park, and and they have like a skate park at this particular park, and of course my kids wear helmets and stuff like that, and then there's certain steep hills. I'm like, I'm very protective of them because my kids are somewhat awkward or clumsy at times. And I remember myself, if you could see my lip right now, it's busted, but part of me busting it was on a skateboard. Fell off, scraped my face, had stitches in my lip, and I have a lot of battle wounds on my body at this point in time from just a lot of falling, a lot of crashing, a lot of hurts. Busted my top lip playing basketball, bit right through my lip, gushing everywhere. I'm sorry for the dramatic visuals, but so I reflect on it, and then you try to be overprotective, but like, your kids need to have life. They need to experience. Sometimes you often guide them, you often warn them what they should and should not do, but they're going to do just like you were and going to be hard headed. They're not going to listen to their folks. Or sometimes they might have. They might be using more wisdom than you did when you were a youngster as well. But you have to be real with them. You have to share with them that there's going to be people that don't like them. There's going to be people who don't agree with them. There's going to be those times of disappointment where you expected certain things to happen and they didn't happen the way you envisioned it. And that goes to my point of even to my speech is like, we're always going to have tests. We're always going to have challenges. And I really wanted to share this episode about who I am. And one of the key points that I just basically touched on, I didn't want to really hit it too hard in the setting that I was in. I don't think it was beneficial. It would have been beneficial to share about my emotions, about my pains, about my heartache. For one of the biggest impacts in my life when I lost my job and how I lost my job. And I probably still won't go into those details right now just because it's in a legal place right now. And though I do have the opportunity to share, those close by me know what transpired. And even despite the other side having their opportunity to share, it's been in our local papers about the front page about 3 different times. And as an individual, you feel like you need to vindicate yourself. And now, and I'm just stating, like, when I was lost my job and how I lost my job, I was very hurt. And I was angry how it was done and how people took this one individual's word without any proof, without any detail. And and it was disheartening. And me, I'm a believer for those who don't know, which means I'm a Christian. I believe in God. I believe in Jesus. Um, and I felt like it was going to work out in my favor, and it still will. But I felt it was going to work out instantly. And we have our own vision, and we all have our own plans of life and what it should be, and how things are going to work out. But it typically doesn't work out that way. Um, and I know individuals who are Christians. Some don't believe the stories in the Bible. I do. I utilize those stories to help me and to bring me hope, to bring me um, life and a sense of purpose. Understanding that many of those individuals went through pain, went through suffering, went through a lot of persecution to get to that end goal. Because that's life, that's reality. No matter how much you try to put somebody in a bubble where they're protected from all types of scenarios and issues, it's not going to be life. It's not going to be real. It's not going to be realistic. And all you do is get a flawed individual because they were never developed. They were always in a state of atrophy or a loss of building muscle, building characteristics, building skill, building talent. And I know a lot of people, some individuals, mainly in in my space, as far as coming from my particular melanin, we focus on being victims. But there are those who don't wade in that puddle of victimhood. They understand where they came from. They understand the realities of their skin color and whatnot. But they move forward. They utilize that trauma, that issue, that pain to motivate them to push them forward. And some also realize who was with them in those storms, in that fire, in that moment of despair. And so when I was talking about tests, typically when you go to school, end of the year or mid semester or whatever, you take tests, you take finals, you take midterms. And the only way to matriculate, probably not in today's time, you would have to pass the test to go to the next level. Today's times, they're trying to change the grades and whatnot, so they'll just pass anybody and everybody just to get them through the system without developing, without learning how to read, how to write. So this was it. If you have challenges and you don't pass those challenges, you're never going to develop. That's the same way, just using that same example. If you just push people past without challenging them, without working on those foundational skills, they're going to be flawed and underdeveloped adults because they never learned to train their minds to develop that skill to do math, to read, to write, to interact. And I know areas of me that are undeveloped because I never challenged those aspects, which I still need to grow in. But those who did develop and learned the basics of 2 plus 2, and then they matriculated up to calculus, algebra, differential equations, it was a process, gradual steps. And so you don't start off with what differential equations or calculus before you start with the basic arithmetic. And so that's how tests in life are as well. And I look at the story of Job. Like, all the pain and punishment when he went through. He lost his family. He lost his cattle. He lost his riches. He suffered physical pain. All because Satan was looking for someone to punish, and he questioned whether they loved God or they loved the material things. That's the only reason they were with God. And God said, "Have you considered my servant Job?" God said it. And God said, you can only go to this point in time. You cannot take his life, or you can't touch him with the first one. You can't touch him at all. So Satan touched everything around Job. He took everything around Job away. And Job passed the test. Then Satan said, well, if you let me touch Job, I bet you he still won't have that same commitment to you. And Jesus said, you can touch him, just don't take his life. So he suffered through pain, bodily pain, persecution, torment from his friends. But yet he was still faithful. Even his very wife said, why don't you just curse God and die? So she thought that was simple and maybe realistic, because like if you see somebody suffering, that was her first thought. And Job says to her, basically like, the God who this very God that bring good, why would I curse him in times of pain and torment? And he told her to get away, because she was used as a vessel of the enemy to try to get Job not to pass the test. But what happened as a result of Job passing his test? He was blessed with double the kids, double the animals, double the influence, and even his enemies or his friends who were talking about him had to pray and had to come and bless him, and they had to ask for forgiveness. But Job passed his test. In certain pain, you cannot recuperate. Yeah, he was blessed with double kids, but he still had the loss of his original kids. That's how I always think of it. But hopefully he will see them in another life. And even my son's name is Joseph, because one of my favorite stories in the Bible was the story of Joseph. Like I said, I love the Old Testament, because these gives me examples of like what I should be expecting in life. And Joseph, he was very, for those who don't know Joseph, or those who may have watched the play Joseph in the Multicolored Dream Code and stuff like that. But the main point of the story was like Joseph, he was the youngest, besides second youngest of 12 boys. The Promised tribe, 12 tribes of Israel. And he had a couple of visions when he was younger, basically about his parents and his brothers submitting or bowing down to him. Like he was going to be elevated to a position where his family would seek out his wisdom or his authority, his rule, his decision making. His brothers, even his dad, didn't like it, but he also stated that his dad just pondered on what Joseph stated. But his dad was also in a position who he made his son stand out, because he made him the Multicolored Dream Code. He was, you could see he was favored among the pack, and based on, I think, because he loved his one of his wives more than any of his harem and whatnot. So I think as a result, he loved the seed that came from her. So let's just speed up the story. So one day his brothers are out in the field, and Joseph was just hanging back. We don't know why he wasn't with his other brothers. But then he was sent out to meet his other brothers. So they seen him on his in the field coming towards them, and they plotted basically to kill him. And then you had one brother said, "No, don't do this. Don't kill him." So rather, they threw him in the pit instead, and basically sold him to some traveling slave traders who came by. and reported to their dad that he was devoured by an animal, a lion or something like that. And they brought back his jacket with blood all on it. So you have to imagine like the dysfunction of a family to basically want to slaughter their own brother and then do that to the father who loved and cherished his son, his child, and for them to just say he was eaten or by an animal and brought back the jacket. So, and then just sell off their brother. So his brother was sold off. He became like a servant to a high profile official within the Egyptian community. Joseph was Jewish, so he served him well, but the official's spouse. And this is one. Joseph was one of the few individuals, and I think now that I think of my son, he's probably rightly named. Like, was very like handsome or beautiful. Like this, he's one of the individuals in the Bible like it explicitly mentions the beauty of him. And so he was sought out by the official's wife, and she basically tried to succumb him, and he wouldn't do it, but she falsely claimed that he tried to basically rape her or sleep with her, and this made the official mad, who sent him off to jail. So he sent him off to jail. So Joseph didn't do nothing wrong first when he was basically almost died, but sent into slavery. Then he didn't do nothing as well when he was sent into prison. So in prison, it said he found favor with the lead prison warden. So Joseph was put in a position of leadership. And like I stated before, he had visions of him actually being in a position of leadership where his family, brothers, and would submit or basically kneel and bow down to him, because he had these visions of these stalks, or in two visions, one's of stalks and one's of stars, basically bowing down to him. So in the midst of him being in prison, two of the Pharaoh's servants were sent down into prison. One was a chief baker, and one was, I guess, the wine bearer. I can't think of the person who makes wine. And they had both had dreams, and they went to Joseph basically to interpret their dreams. And I can't explicitly think of how the dreams were, but basically one, it was interpreted that he was going to be restored back into the good grace of the Pharaoh, while the other one, which was the baker, his dream was like the ravens were eating out of his head, and then he was basically said, the other one, you're gonna die in a matter of 3 days. So that was basically their fate. And the one who was restored to his grace, he told him, he's like, please don't forget me when you return into the grace of the Pharaoh. Remember who basically spoke this or interpret this vision for you. And of course the guy said, yeah. And of course he didn't, because that's reality. You ask for favor for people. And I'll just state, like, those people that I was friends with prior to losing my job, not all, it was particular ones that I was close to. The ones I reached out to for assistance, not financial, but I just needed information on basically what transpired. And it was certain, like, they just ghosted me, didn't want to answer my calls, didn't want to respond, or never had these issues with them in the past. Like, they would respond instantly, they would always want to hang out, but it was like, all of a sudden they was like ghosting me. I'm like, oh, is this how you really are? And it was just, and I look at those moments, it's like those, you remember the people who treated you how people treated you when you were down and when you're in need, because and you see many stories like when people were celebrities and whatnot, like like they feel like everybody wants to connect with them, everybody wants to hang out because they have money and whatnot. But then when they don't have money, it's like, where are all those buddies? Where are those hookups? Where are those people who just wanted to chill? And I experienced that similar. It's like we were cool this whole time, and then like now all of a sudden, like, you don't want to have anything to do me. You can't just do me a simple favor. You can't. You don't have time to answer your call just for a simple request. But then I also remember those who I would joke about or joke with, and probably had, I won't say the wrong perception, but I just never thought they would be attached as what they were, and then like they were the ones who were like reaching out, hitting me up, hey, how you doing, Jamal? How are things going? And like I said, when you're isolated, when you're by yourself, it's different. And like and I got inspiration. I felt love just from a simple check in. And so, going back just to the test, like you sometimes have to go through scenarios or issues to have empathy for what other people may be going through. And I felt love just from like some simple texts, some simple just check ins. And me being an introvert, I don't do that. I didn't do that during the past before the pandemic. I didn't reach out. I just felt like everybody's in out in space. You just think about yourself. And I saw the importance and the value of just simple connection. So going back to the story of Joseph, he was forgotten once again. So I think a couple years passed by, and the Pharaoh had a dream. I don't know if it was one or two dreams, but he had a dream. And he had his, in those times they have basically like their magicians or their prophets or their leaders that they depend on. Like you see in America or any other states, they just have their chiefs who can do what. And so he had his basically soothsayers, magicians, or whatever. He's like, this is my dream. Who can interpret it? And none of them can interpret it. And I don't know if this was similar to another one as far as like Daniel, where like he states basically he's going to start killing people if they can't. Like, what are you here for? This is the whole purpose of you being in this position. And now it comes time to do what you're called to do, and you can't fulfill it, then you're worthless to me. And so once he sends out this edict, then I don't know what to call him. It's like the wine tester or something. He says, oh, I recall back when I was in prison. Remember, Pharaoh, when you sent me in prison? Yeah, back when I was in prison, I actually had a dream. And this person basically interpreted my dream. And it actually happened just as he stated it. And he says, send this person to me. And so then they state that Joseph cleaned up himself, made his presentation good because he's going to be basically in front of the leader of Egypt, the leader of this country or this land. So he cleans himself up and makes his presentation good. And then he says, he shares about his dream. And basically, it was two different versions. One's about cows and one's about grain or wheat. And basically saying it's going to be severing. And so this is how Joseph interpreted his dream. And I won't go to the specifics because I'm going to be kind of off. And it's going to confuse some of you guys the way I talk about it anyway. Since I'll be lost in translation. He basically predicts that it's going to be 7 full years of just growth, prosperity, just abundance, and you're going to be flourishing for seven years. But then he says, then the back half of your dream is that it's going to be 7 lean years of drought, lack, nothing. And And just to say, like, climate change, there was always issues with climate, even in the Bible, where they had drought, they had inclement inclement weather and stuff like that. But so there's 7 years. And so he says basically you need to prepare, utilize those several years that you were flourishing to basically prepare, sustain you for those 7 years of lack or drought. Um, so, and he states how he should do it. And so, based off his wisdom, based off his presentation, the Pharaoh says, "I want you to lead my this process, and I'm going to make you second in command. So you're only beneath me. You will be in control over everybody else during this period of time." And so Joseph, he went from being thrown into a pit, potentially about to die. Then he went to being sold as a slave. Then went to be accused of being raped, thrown into prison, interpreting dreams in prison, forgotten in prison, and then elevated to the second in command into in a flourishing region, a large region. So that's not the end of the story now, because the first original dream was basically his family members kneeling and bowing before him. All right, so there were several years where they were flourishing. So then they built warehouses to store basically the abundance of the harvest. Then there came lean years where the people or didn't have enough. So then it was basically bartering, or they were giving up their land and in order to receive food, and they were so that was that exchange. And then it got to the point where it's so bad then they were working on the land for the Egyptian kingdom in exchange for food. So Jacob and his family, Jacob is Joseph's father, they were impacted by the drought. So they ran out of grain. And Jacob sent his brothers with a lot of money to basically go purchase some grain. And so his brothers came to Egypt, and they came before Joseph. They didn't recognize Joseph at the time, but he recognized them. And he was asking them various questions. One in particular about his youngest brother, who was younger than him, Benjamin. He asked how he was doing, because Benjamin wasn't involved in any of the negative impacts of his life, because he wasn't there when they were working as well. And so they purchased the grain and whatnot, and then he sends them on their way with the grain. But he also tells them to his servants basically to put their money back into their bags. And so then I might mix the two. It was two different incidents similar to this. So it was either put the money back or put his cup in their bag. So then on their way home, they got stopped as they began their journey, and he had their bag searched and accused them basically trying to get over on him by not paying what was owed them and actually stealing from them. And he says, "I'm going to keep you guys here. Send me," and he's like, "Send me your youngest brother and whatnot." And so they're like, "No, our father is distraught. He already lost his firstborn, or not his firstborn, one of his favorite son. He would die if he lost Benjamin and whatnot." And he says, I think and they basically came to a point where they agreed they leave one of their brothers. I think it was Simeon. So they sent what is that, 10 brothers home, or 9 brothers, one stayed. And they reported to the father, and he's like, "What have you done? Didn't I give you money?" And they say, "Yeah, but the Pharaoh's leader, he was not happy, and this is what happened." And so they didn't immediately go back to get Simeon. They waited till they were out of basically their grain that they purchased or went up there for, and so they were like, "We need to go back." And he says, "If you don't come back with Benjamin, then he's not going to release Simeon, or he's not going to give us the grain." And they said, "We're going to die basically if we don't make a decision to go back." And so the father Jacob was like, "Okay, go back." And I don't know why I'm just going so long in the story, but I'm like, this is a podcast. You guys are all here listening anyway. So he says, "Go back." And so Joseph sees them, and they come back. Yeah, so they come back. He released their brother. He tells them to feast with them. So he has his people set up a table before him, and since he's and the Egyptians don't know he's Jewish, so Egyptians and Jewish, they don't sit together. So he's sitting in his own table, whatnot, and he has the feast for his brothers at another table, and he's asked for his younger brother to get several times a portion of everybody else. So his youngest brother Benjamin was allotted a lot, and so he's listening to him. And then he breaks away and says he's crying because it's like these are his brothers, and he longs and he misses them. But I'm sure there was emotions, like he also remembers what transpired as well. But it never even stated that he had any kind of like negative nature against them. From reading it, just like he loved his brothers, and he didn't want to reveal himself to them. So basically, sends them on his way, but then he gives them his goblet. Basically, he has one of his servants put his goblet in one of their bags. So he does the same thing. He has his people stop and says, "How could you insult me by stealing?" And they says, "None of us would steal." It's like, if any of us steal, just take off. You could kill us today or something like that. And the goblet was actually stored in Benjamin's uh, his in his camel or his luggage, whatever you want to call it. And so when it is revealed, it's like the brothers all like tear off their clothes. They're like, "No, this is not true. This is not happening. He didn't do anything. Like, we cannot tell this to our dad. He's going to basically die if his Benjamin is basically the next favorite son." Because I think part of the reason is like he reflects on Joseph dying. He blames his brothers for it in some ways, and so they're like, "No, our dad, like, we cannot." And he like brings them back, and he's like, "This must happen." They're like breaking down, crying, and he's like, "No, our dad." And so then maybe this is when the Joseph start crying. Then he come back and reveals himself. He says, "I'm the brother you sold to slaves, you put in the pit." And they were caught off guard. They were shocked. Like, maybe I should have just been beaten instead of just talking. So they were shocked. And they were hugging and crying, and like they couldn't believe it was him. And so basically, they go tell the dad and the family that Joseph is alive, and then there's just joy and excitement. And Joseph tells the Pharaoh that these are his people, and the Pharaoh just loves and trusts Joseph so much, and he respects him so much, and he says, "You can have them in any land. You can have them set up, and if they're farmers and whatnot." So he made provisions for them. So I think Jacob brought about, it was about 70 people, or maybe 170. I can't think of it right now. Basically 7. So he brings his whole family back, and Jacob is ecstatic, and it's like, I should read it up because, as I was just mentioning earlier, when I was talking about my uncle and I was talking about my parents and grandparents, how you get life from loved ones. They give you hope. They give you life. The same was stated of Jacob as well. Um, Let me see. All right, so like I was stating, family brings life, loved ones brings life, and they were already. You know how the brothers were coming up to Joseph, said he's on the verge of dying, he's about to die. When they were seeking food, they said he was on his basically deathbed, and like any bad news would only basically take him to the point of like death. But here it states, so Israel, who was Jacob, dwelt in the land of Egypt in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions there and grew in multitude exceedingly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So he was 130 when he first came into the land. He died at the age of 147. So he was already old. And so they knew any slight thing would take away the hope and bring forth despair. And there's no life when you have no hope. There's no purpose when you have no hope. So taking a loved one takes the air. Have you had those moments where, whether it's a lost one or you had somebody reject you that you love so much and it's taken away from you, or it ends, that joy, that love, it's like you lose your breath. And so this is what I was stating about some of the decisions we make. We talk about for the purpose of your health, but they don't understand like our connection, that life is driven through the connection to loved ones. And so Jacob was able to live another 17 years as a result of his connection to his son and seeing his grandsons through the lineage of Jacob. And it extended his life because he had hope. He had hope. And my question to you is, do you have hope? Or are there other people in life that you know are in despair and they're lacking, and you have an ability to check in on them, to give them that life, that sense of purpose, to motivate them, to connect with them, to give them hope, to remind them who they were called to be, to remind them who they were created for, what their purpose in life was. Because we oftentimes look at kids and like the only avenue, the only sense of purpose is only in the youth. There are many people still right now who haven't fulfilled their purpose, who have never tapped into those visions or tapped into their identity because they weren't connected or weren't inspired or didn't have that hope, or they didn't pass their test. I'm about to be 44. It's certain tests I haven't passed yet. It's, like when you're working in something, like, this is fine and all, but I don't think I was created for this. I was created for more than this. And some of you have that same thing in you right now. And that's why I even talk about some of the very catalysts, some of the very challenges may be the catalyst to propel you to your destiny. And that was the case for a lot of people in the pandemic, because certain people who were utilizing whether YouTube or some sort of business, they were thriving because they were walking into their purpose. It pushed them into their purpose. They saw that they didn't have to be dependent on that job, and they walked away from that job and they did what they desired, or they were created, or they had that passion to do. And so I don't knock challenges. It says embrace them, accept them, be thankful for them. Because wrapped inside that, it's propelling you. It's going to create something in you. It's going to push you into the place, into the destiny that you were called to go. And so, me relating to the story of Joseph, I've been through many trials. I've been through many tests. I've been many challenges. So yes, losing my job was difficult. But I can reflect on those other opportunities where God kept me while other people around me were losing their job. While God sustained me while other people around me were losing hope, were losing despair. Those moments of time when it's only me by myself, when my parents weren't there, my family weren't there. They weren't called to be there because God wanted me to know Him intimately. So sometimes situations and challenges come to separate individuals so you can only be dependent on one. And oftentimes, now you can see it even now, we're enabling a mindset, a work ethic, where they're dependent on an entity, a program to sustain in life. And yes, those programs and aspects are beneficial for certain points in time, but God also wants you to be dependent on Him. Because I realized after losing my job, well, I knew before because I would always state, because there was times when I was told like wasn't gonna have this job, to look elsewhere, but God sustained me, God kept me, He actually elevated me. But the thing is, like, even when it was stated to me, I'm like, this job is not my source. And so when losing my job, I still had to have that same belief. Who is my source? Who is going to keep me? All my needs were still met. My housing, my food, my transportation, not only for me, but my family as well. So God still sustained me even though I was quote unquote lacking. One of the key phrases that's mentioned several times in the story of Joseph, it says, and the Lord was with him. Wait, but Joseph was thrown in the pit. Joseph was in prison. But it said, and the Lord was with him. And he found favor in the pit. He found favor in the prison because the Lord was with him. So when I didn't have a job, I knew the Lord was with me. And let me just finish off the story of Joseph for those that may not know it. The father dies. Like I said, he lived to be 147 years old. And the brothers got scared because they felt that was the only means of like mediation or only means of like peace between them and their brother. They're like, oh, now that dad is dead, he's gonna pay us back for what we did. And they even tried to contrive a story to send messengers to Joseph say, oh, before dad died, he said, can you please forgive your brothers for the wrong they did? So they're still lying. They're still trying to manipulate. And that's the sad thing, that they still They never learned anything throughout that period of time without Joseph. They didn't grow in their faith with God during that time because they weren't challenged. They never passed their tests. And that's the unfortunate thing. And let me just read you Joseph's response. So they asked for forgiveness. And Joseph, he wept. And then he spoke to them. And he said, he wept, and it says his brothers, they all went and fell down before his face, and they wept and said, we are your servants. And Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? And that portion means like, and the Bible says vengeance is mine. So we are not to basically respond in the same manner that is given to us as far as negative treatment. He says, I'm not in the place of God. I'm not in the place of distributing judgment or retribution for ill-advised actions. He says, but as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. And so when I was, some of the responses to my speech, some people stated, I felt convicted. I don't even know why. I went up there with the intention to share my story and to put a lot of biblical undertones because that's what drives my life without being overly explicit where people feel I'm preaching at them. Because the world doesn't know the Bible, but they can connect to life in your story. So I had to present my story and how God was involved in my story without explicitly saying God, because that wasn't the context. In this podcast, I can say God, 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 all I want. So I stated that I accept the good and the bad in my life because I believe all things work for my good. Not stating that all things, including the bad things, are good, but I feel that God can utilize those bad things to propel me to whatever I need to go or whatever characteristic or quality I need to possess. So they meant it for evil, because they were actually being utilized as tools or vessels by the enemy for Joseph's vision not to be realized. Because at the end of the day, they did succumb under the authority of Joseph as the second ruler in Egypt. So his vision was fulfilled. And some of the responses that I received, even from some women to my speech, is like, you were more relatable and realistic than this woman speaker on women in the workplace and how to fulfill. Like, she was talking like it was almost like fairy tales and like cupcakes. Like, that's not life. Like I said before, we cannot be in this bubble. And life sometimes is not linear, or oftentimes is not linear from point A to point B. There may be some obstacles. You may go backwards. You may go down. You may go sideways. But if God spoke it in your life, if God implanted in your heart, if God gave you this dream, if you realize you are not doing what you feel innately like you are supposed to be doing, there is a path, but we must pass our tests in order to get to that final destination. So if you do not pass your test, you will be like the children of Israel, where it's like a 13-mile journey, a 2-week journey, or something like that. And they spent 40 years, some not even reaching the promised land, because they kept failing the tests. They kept relying on self. They kept complaining with the challenges. They weren't content in the provisions God made. So they complained and complained and complained and was negative, was doubtful, was fearful, despite provisions being made, miraculous provisions being made, the parting of the seas, the fire by night, the cloud and the shade by the day, the shoes that didn't have any wear and tear on, but they still were complaining. This was not good enough. So they never passed their test. And are you complaining about the provisions that you have? Are you complaining? Are you mad at God for what he hasn't done for you yet? Are you mad at God for not bringing you to your promised land that he said he would do? And I'm talking to you because I've had those thoughts and I have those moments too. Because I thought I just should be just transported to this destination. And like I stated, I have even a case. I thought it would be done like this. Like, everybody should know the truth. It's simple. He did this, this, and this. And I have this evidence and yada, yada. It doesn't work that way. That is not life. There are evil people. There's an ultimate demonic force that is trying to prohibit you from fulfilling your purpose. And if it was that big, do you think he would allow that to happen? Don't you think he would rather you complain, that you moan and groan, and you give up on what you were called to do? And you must also know that you need to fulfill your purpose. You need to reach your destiny. Because ultimately, the promise is not about you. It is about others connected to you on your path to your destination or at your final destination. They're waiting for you to fulfill the purpose that you were called to be. The call to do. Because I didn't read you the rest of the portion. It says, "But as you meant for evil against me, God meant it for good, in order to bring about, as it is this day, to save many people alive." So we always look at this little circle where it was just Joseph and his brothers bowing down and the provisions for his family. But no, he actually had provisions for the Egyptians and the Jewish and the people in the surrounding regions. God was preserving multiple people, but they didn't even realize that. God was making provision for those connected to Joseph, the Pharaoh and all his people. So when God puts you in a position, it's not for you, it's for you and your peers, your coworkers, your bosses. Do you bring favor to that state of employment that you're in? Do you bring favor to that residence that you live in? You were called for such a time as this. Because I read that what you meant for evil, God would use for my good. And in Romans it says, God uses for those that love God. For those that love God and are called according to his purpose. His purpose, not your purpose, his purpose. For those that love God and are called according to his purpose, he will work all things together to the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. God works all things out together for the good of those who love him and are called for his purpose. Until you realize your life is not your own. Your calling is not your own. It is not about you. It is not about those in your little bubble. It has a greater importance and a greater impact, not ultimately for this life, but for this life past this life. The greater hope, the greater peace. And is your life bringing hope or inspiring to other people that are currently dying in this dark world? If you look at the news, if you look at society, if you look at your workplace, do you see death? Do you see despair? We are called to be the salt, add distinct flavor. We are called to be the light, to bring light into a dark world. Are you bringing light with your words? Are you bringing hope with your words? That was the one thing I noticed in my speech or the responses. People were inspired. And it wasn't of my own doing. God was using me to touch people's life at that very point in time. Because I got young men, old men, young women, old women. People just various backgrounds. And I'm like, this is the power of the gospel. This is the power of the good news. This is the power of the life giver, which is God. It has nothing to do with myself. And I had to reflect, and I was sitting there crying. Because I'm like, I didn't do anything. This is all God. So when people compliment me, I'm like, thank you. I'm glad it ministered to you. So this is what I say, moving forward, no breaks. I want you, those who watch or watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, I hope this inspired or trickled something in you, lit something in you, a flame in you. Like, I need to move forward. No more breaks. No more flunking that test. That test of whether how do I respond to my spouse? How do I respond to my boss? Or not getting out of bed to do this. Not reaching out and calling this family member. We all have various tests. There's tests constantly in life. Are you passing those tests? Are you moving on to the next level, or are you going in the circle? Unfulfilled promises, untapped potential. That is not what we were called to be. We're called to be ambassadors. We were set apart, a royal priesthood, chosen generation. We were chosen. God said to the enemy, have you considered my servant such and such? Have you considered my servant Jamal? Have you considered my servant Naomi? Have you considered my servant Ruth? Have you considered my servant Joseph, Jacob, Marcus, Michael, whatever your name is, put it in there. Nothing that comes against you that God is not aware of. He is not surprised. He just wants to know, do you trust him? And we need to show to him that he can trust us. So can he trust you with that talent? Can he trust you with that destiny? Have you built that characteristic, that quality, that character, whatever it needs to be, that you need to possess to be in that position of influence? Will you point them to him? Or will this all be about you? So I want you to pass your tests. If this was my final podcast, my one and only podcast, let it be so. But we need to move forward. No more breaks. No more stopping. No more failures. Pass our test. We all talk about a new year. We all start these new traditions and whatnot. Just be consistent. Each day is a new day. As long as you have breath in your lungs, you still have the ability to pass your test, to please God, to fulfill your potential, to tap into that purpose. I spoke a while. But I'm trying to give you something for your podcast or for this podcast to listen to. Uh, like I said, we'll see how it morphs and shapes over time. I'll probably have more planned out process to shorten it out. I don't know, but for those driving, I know I drive. I have a long commute, so longer podcasts are beneficial for me. So thank you for listening. Thank you for stopping by. Uh, and I guess it's customary, but I never just hit that like button, click subscribe if you want to hear more of me. I don't know what else it is. Smash like, uh, but yeah, just stay tuned. Support me as I support you uh, as we move forward together. God bless. Peace.